Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Steve Oken. I'm the president of CoreALM, and we're here today with an interesting topic. Everybody's talking about clean core for S4 and for SAP. What that means might be different to a lot of people, but the basic concept is that you want to keep your core SAP environment clean from any customizations. That's going to help you to improve stability. And that will in turn, give you a much more predictable experience, allow you to do kind of more agile style development for your SAP. It involves using side-by-side extensions generally. And a side-by-side extension means that you're keeping your SAP clean and using configurations only for the most part. There's always going to be some changes that you need to make in your core environment. But the rest of the customizations, enhancements, integrations would be handled in a separate environment. And SAP's target environment for those side-by-side changes is BTP. BTP is the Business Technology Platform. Probably many of you have it already set up and configured. And there's lots of different types of services that you can create within BTP, but it is the kind of cloud-based development platform that SAP offers to allow those kind of side-by-side extensions. What we're going to be talking about today is basically how you can leverage our tools that would allow you to maintain the clean core environment and make changes to your core, but also keep on top of changes in your BTP environment using the cloud transport management services from SAP. So we're going to jump into that in a few minutes. Just a quick bit of background on CoreALM, who we are. Our company was founded about 15 years ago when our CEO and founder left his position at SAP, where he was the head of the application lifecycle management process and practice at SAP. Many of our team worked at SAP before joining CoreALM. And so working in that space, he saw an opportunity basically to fill a niche which didn't have other competitors in that space at the time. And that niche was focusing on application lifecycle management services at the time, and then specifically for SAP customers. It was about 2018 when he realized there was an opportunity because of course, many companies that run SAP, it's a very central component of their landscape, but they also have other applications that they use. And for those other applications, they use tools like Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow. And so we saw an opportunity to bridge the gap between SAP's ALM tool, which is Solution Manager that at the time. Now we have Cloud ALM from SAP as well, with those other enterprise tools like Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow. And that's really where we started down our software mission. And those applications have evolved, and we have installed those in many of our customers' environments. We've covered all kinds of different environments and scenarios, from high security environments like the financial industry to military and defense, to highly regulated industries such as FDA controlled food services or pharma businesses, life sciences companies, and pretty much everything else, manufacturing, retail. We've pretty much covered the gap. And we've seen these in very large scale implementations as well as small, and we're able to hit the scale and the robust feature requirements and the needs of our diverse customer group. Just a quick step back in terms of how we see business transformations overall. Business transformations we see as a continuous improvement cycle. It starts where you say, I want to make an improvement to my business process. And then, of course, you have to go into the mode where you're managing projects, maintaining your solution. That could be clean core type updates, which would be both in your ABAP system as well as in your BTP platform. And then eventually you have to operate and maintain those applications. Maybe you have some reporting dashboards and monitoring capabilities that you use. And from there, you should get the feedback that you were able to achieve the business process improvements that you set out to do. And then based on that feedback, you go around the loop again, and then you do the next round of improvements. This is true regardless of whether you're doing a major, business transformation project, let's say an S4 greenfield implementation, or a system upgrade project, or even just, ongoing maintenance releases. Same process applies effectively. You just do it on a smaller scale. The challenge is that to do these things, you need many different capabilities, and those capabilities exist in a bunch of different tools. Of course, you have the application lifecycle management tools that come from SAP, such as Cloud ALM, which is kind of their current sort of gold standard, cloud-based application lifecycle management. And they have other tools that sort of go around that, like Signavio, Tricentis for testing, and WalkMe for customer engagement, employee engagement and training. But then from an enterprise perspective, there's other tools that are used for development. Jira is often used for requirements management and agile development. Azure DevOps for more DevOps style kind of pipeline oriented implementation, deployment automations, and then ServiceNow for change management authorizations. Making generalizations because those tools are broad, but those tend to be used by many different organizations. So the problem is many of these tools have overlapping sort of capabilities. And so the big question is, how do I unify? How do I bring everything together? And really, that's what CoreALM is attempting to deliver with all of our products, is to create that unification layer where we can take the best practices of all these different tools, take the data, exchange it, so you can have one workflow that allows you to exchange and interchange all that information without manual duplication of effort, without any kind of extra effort on the side of the team, and also to be able to enforce those kinds of automations that would allow this to flow more seamlessly. We have many different products that sort of fit into that application unification layer. Solution manager connectors, if you're still using, let's say, Focus Build or Charm, which many of our customers still do. Cloud ALM connectors, which allow you to take advantage of the latest, greatest. And then, of course, the direct transport management capabilities, which we offer, that allow you to take the features of Charm, which aren't yet fully robust in the Cloud ALM product, and then embed them directly into your tool of choice. And that could be a combination. If you're using, let's say, Jira for projects and ServiceNow for operations, we can give you both of those experiences and allow you to control SAP transports directly in those tools, so you don't have to kind of switch screens back and forth to manage your transports. And that allows you to have a more agile or DevOps oriented operational workflow. It also unlocks the ability to accelerate your workflow with automations. We talk about shift left automations, meaning do earlier the things that need to be done so that you catch problems sooner, which lowers your overall cost and reduces your timeline. It also gives you the ability to automate processes so that you don't have to do manual steps. So for instance, you could automatically be running code vulnerability and quality checks as soon as your developers are ready to do their testing. You can automatically analyze changes that are on your platform to assess the risk. And then based on that risk, or what are the risk areas that are identified using applications like Tricentis Live Compare, you can automatically execute test cases that you have in your test case repository and lower that risk so that you know that you're managing those impacts. You can also, and this is what we're going to share with you today, focus on a full package release. So let's say you're making a change that requires an ABAP change to your core, as well as a change to, let's say, CPI, where you're doing your interface. Maybe there's a front end change associated with it as well, which could be in your, let's say, Node.js platform, and then all of that is potentially on BTP. We can help you to synchronize those so that you're moving the change as one big package, as opposed to having a whole bunch of independent changes that need to be coordinated. This allows the teams to be able to collaborate more in real time and to be able to share information back and forth and to have visibility to all of that status information with one user interface and a consistent workflow that is doing all the error checking that you can expect from standard SAP tools like Charm. We're going to jump into the demonstration. Before we get there, just a quick note, please do follow us on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, we have a newsletter that we publish on a weekly basis. We cover a variety of topics, and we issue newsletters every week. Scan the barcode on the top left corner. You can subscribe to that newsletter and you'll get notified for any further updates. We also have webinar topics. Those webinar topics on the resources side allow you to subscribe to webinars like this, and you can also request access to videos from past webinars. And if you would like to see a tailored demonstration to meet your specific application's needs, you can go to our website and click, which is CoreALM.com. You can click on the Talk to an Expert button in the top right corner of your screen, and then you can fill out the form that would give you comes to us, and then we would basically reach out to you directly, and we can do live demonstration tailored to your specific needs. We can answer your questions directly, even if you just have a short question that you want to answer to see if something is possible. We would be happy to walk you through that. That's what I have for today. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to introduce our guest for today. That is Danik Malademi. Danik, welcome. Danik is an application lifecycle management expert. He's an architect here at CoreALM, and he is going to walk us through the demonstration today for how to move transports, including transports in the Business Technology Platform environment for SAP. Hello, Danik.
Thank you very much, Steve. Can you just confirm that you can hear me okay and you can see my screen?
Yes, you're all good to go.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. And as Steve introduced us to the tool, I'm going to take off and we're going to take a look at the tool live in action. We're going to see a quick demo and how we perform changes in an ABAP environment, let's say on-premise or on the cloud, but for the S4 system, as well as for BTP type changes, whether it's CPI or different tool sets within BTP. So what we're seeing on the screen here is an example that we're going to look at today. In this case, we're going to see ServiceNow. And then we're going to see the statuses of ServiceNow. And then within each status of ServiceNow, there's going to be certain actions that are going to be executed. And those actions are, for example, like creating the request, requesting for approval, approving it. So these are all standard steps in ServiceNow. However, where our connector and our tool comes in is when it brings the back-end systems together with the front-end system is, for example, in status authorized. In today's example, we have decided that we're going to display the action buttons within authorized status. And these action buttons are essentially buttons that the end user would need to, or actions that need to be executed in the managed system, in this case, either S4 or cloud-based system. But the idea is that actions like creating transports, creating tasks, coupling existing transports, coupling existing changes that are in cloud-based solutions, all these action buttons can be made available within ServiceNow interface. So where you can execute those actions directly from ServiceNow without having to log into another tool to execute such actions. So the idea is that we will streamline the process. The process will be driven from a single tool and from a single interface and manage all the related elements, whether it's transports in multiple systems, transports in the cloud, and then those will move together in the appropriate environments, whether it's to QA, to pre-production, to some performance testing system, and then finally to production. So the entire process can be managed from a change request in ServiceNow. As you can see here, we have separated these also by roles. So at the level 1, what we do is we map buttons to a specific status, and then we have the ability to add additional conditions on top of it to say that specific buttons are only visible when specific conditions are met. So, for example, I can import the transport that's already been released. So, for example, a transport must be released before we can import it. So, therefore, the import button will not be displayed until all the predecessor conditions are met. In addition to that, what we're demonstrating here is that we can add the layer of segregation of duties. So in addition to mapping buttons to specific status, in addition to the conditions that we can set when the buttons appear, we can also add another layer to say that only specific people or people that are playing these specific roles can access these buttons at a within specific conditions and then within a specific status. So this gives us the full granularity and the control as to who can execute what buttons when specific conditions are correct, and obviously when all the steps have been completed. So as we see here, most of the actions are going to happen in authorized. So in today's example, we're going to create an ABAP transport. And then in parallel, we're also going to manage a cloud-based change that already exists, and we're going to process that through our landscape. Okay, and then the system that we're going to use, at least for the ABAP, is going to be TRI-050. We have a multi-client system that's going to simulate each environment, but essentially we're going to make a change in TRI-050. We're going to move the change to 60, and then eventually to TRI-099. But essentially, along with the ABAP transport, we have a change, a cloud-based change that's going to move into QA at the same time that the ABAP transport will move in. Okay. So the very first thing upon deploying the tool is we have to essentially add the buttons to a specific status. So the next screen that I'm going to show you is going to be the actual tool. I just want you to realize that for a normal change, we're going to have many buttons mapped to the status authorized and then to status implement. And the way this looks upon developing or deploying our tool, it's pretty much GUI driven where we can configure it, but essentially we can select the change type. In this case, we do support any change types that you might have created, any custom change types. But in this case, we're just going to map to the normal change that's delivered, that's standard by ServiceNow. And then in this case, we mentioned in status authorized, we're going to map several buttons like creating transport tasks, creating and importing POCs, the releasing the transport, importing the transport. But even though we're calling them a transport, a lot of these buttons do not mean that they're only limited to the ABAP transport. For example, importing that transport, it can be for a cloud-based. So the same button can be used for different types of transports depending on which one is selected. And then in other statuses like scheduled, implement, and review, we have buttons like refreshing the TR information in ServiceNow, or transport information, and then importing and then refreshing, or and retrofitting the transport. So we can touch base on the retrofit portion as well. So the entire process begins by us looking at our existing changes or creating a new change. And in this case, we mentioned that we're going to create a normal change. So this is all pretty much standard service now in terms of statuses and the configuration. And I will point out where our tool comes in and how it can be brought in for SAP changes. The main idea is that you will have, or you most likely already have, a change process in ServiceNow. Within that change process, or that change process is used for SAP and non-SAP maintenance changes or projects. However, not every change will be obviously for SAP. So the idea is that we need to identify the changes that require SAP transport, or whether it's ABAP or cloud-based transport. And the way we do that is we introduce a field called SAP change, which has a value, default value to none. We can set it to yes or no. What I would like to get your attention to is that as soon as I set this field to yes, what you'll notice that there is an SAP transport tab that becomes visible as part of the form. And this is essentially the trigger that says this change is going to be integrated using the CoreALM tool with a backend system. Now we do have a configuration screen where we identify all of our target systems. If we have multiple landscape, all of that's done in the background, and then we'll see how it all integrates into this one form. But essentially, we say that we have an SAP change set to yes. The value of this field. So, for example, if you don't want to modify the layout of the ServiceNow form, you can, for example, hide the field SAP change, but the SAP change can be set to yes behind the scenes based on another field. So, for example, if your configuration item, maybe it's the some specific S4 system or cloud-based system, then that would determine that this is cloud-based system. It needs a transport, and we can set the SAP change to yes in the background, which would trigger the transport tab to be created, but without the field being visible. Another important thing is that any customization configuration that you have in your ServiceNow process from an end-to-end perspective, any customization that you have, we're going to pretty much leave all those intact. We're not going to interfere with any customization or automation that you have already built as part of your process. We're just bringing in additional steps that are related to SAP steps that can be executed from ServiceNow. So in terms of process, maybe we will add hooks to say that we cannot proceed forward until whatever mandatory fields you have set up and mandatory conditions, but we will just add an additional condition and say, in addition to everything, we would also need the SAP transports to be in a specific system or in a specific status before we can continue on. What I'm trying to say with that is that we most likely will not interfere with your process that you currently use. We'll just enhance it to add a few more steps that relate to SAP. And as we get into this demo, so what I'm doing today, I'm going to show you the most manual process possible. And the reason for that is that we can see that we have control along every step of the process. But if there is any automation that's required, along the way, we can automate certain things. For example, when a change request transition from one status to another, we could trigger one of those action buttons. When a specific field, for example, has whatever value we determine, we can trigger an action based on that. So as we go through the demo today, the main idea is that it's going to look very manual. I'm going to execute all the steps with one user. So you're going to see me refresh the screen. So it might look cumbersome, but if an end user is using this tool, they're not going to execute steps that I'm going to execute today in one go. It'll be built in chunks. So therefore, the process today is going to seem cumbersome, but otherwise it's going to be very streamlined if different individuals execute the change. Okay, so as we go through this, we need to fill certain mandatory fields in ServiceNow, otherwise we will not be able to proceed. We're going to populate the assignment group. Let's say we assign it to the SAP support team. Assignment group could be another trigger for the SAP changes. But we'll update in some of the fields here. And then we're going to go ahead and save this change. As a result now, what we're going to see is the change has been saved. We have a change request number. And when we go to the SAP Transport tab, at this point, it's going to be an empty tab. And what's going to be interesting is that as I transition through the statuses and as the status of transports and different element changes, you'll see that the buttons will appear or disappear depending on the conditions of this change request and the values within the change request. So in this case, the next step is for us to go ahead and enter the status assess, which will mean that we need to request an approval. An approval will be generated, and then we have to provide that approval before we can move to status authorized. This means that we have some pre-approvals in place for someone to review this change to go ahead and approve to say that development can begin. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and request approval. We're going to move to status assess. And then in the approval section, I will see that one approver has been generated. Me being the administrator of the system, I can approve on other people's behalf. And I'm going to go ahead and just do that. And if you have any digital signature built in, as you can see here, we're retaining all of those settings. So for example, if you need to sign the approval with a secondary signature, then we will be able to do that. Okay, so As mentioned before, most of the actions, most of the things we're going to see in status authorize. So as suspected, once we get into the status, we see that the SAP Transport tab now contains some buttons. Again, we mentioned earlier that we mapped multiple buttons to the status authorized, but as you see here, we only saw the refresh button, the create transport, and the couple transport. That's because we're depending on the additional conditions that I had mentioned earlier. So in this case, we have an option to create a transport that's available in the ABAP, that's going to be available in the ABAP system. But first, let's go ahead and couple a change that's coming from for the change that already exists in BTP or in the cloud. So you can see in this case we have a landscape type of CTMS and we have a CPI instance. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and pick the system where I have several changes that have been exported, and then at this point those become transportable changes. At this point, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to select one of the available changes, and I'm going to couple that with the ServiceNow change. In this case, we have change ending in 405, and then we have the details about the cloud-based transport that we have. At this point, the change has been made and it's exported and it's been coupled to this particular change request. At this point, we can select the particular change, and you can see here, depending on what is selected on the screen, the buttons will change. In this case, I might go ahead and import this change into QA. However, if I have any additional changes that need to be made, let's say some API enhancement or anything that's going to communicate with the service in BTP, then we have an opportunity to create a transport within the same change request to create a transport for the backend system as well. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a transport with the same name in SAP. I'm going to go ahead and select my development system. As we mentioned, system TRI will be our development system. And then we're going to choose the transport type that we're going to create in ABAP system. So in this case, I'm just going to select the customizing request. And then we're going to select the user, which will do a lookup or execute a lookup in the backend system to make sure that this particular user exists, and we can assign a transport to that user. I can create one or more tasks for the given transport if needed. If I need to break up that work and assign that work to multiple configurators or developers, I can give them each their own task. And last but not least, on the screen, we have the capability to add some manual steps along our process. So for example, before the import of the transport, if I need to execute or if I need to let the user know that some specific steps need to be executed, we can go ahead and click on the before transport import button, and then we can enter the details here. For example, execute report ABC or just some profile parameter. And similarly to the before import, we also have after import, we have another opportunity to mention some manual steps that need to be executed after the import of the given transport. In this case, we're not going to select either one, but we have that option if we need to. What we're going to do is we went ahead and clicked on create transport, and as the communication is happening, we can see that we got some results back. In this case, we have a change request in ServiceNow that contains that is related to two different change types within two different systems. We have the cloud-based transport, and we have the ABAP-based transport tied to the same change. And as we look at the ABAP side, let me bring up my backend system here, and let's dive into the transport that was just created. So what you'll notice is that we have a transport in the backend system now with number 1358, or sorry, yeah, 1538. So we have the transport here, 1538, with a task 1539. So we can see those details, what type they are, who the owner is, the current status, and the description of the transport. So we can see these details available, in ServiceNow as they are in the backend system. One thing I want to get your attention to here is the transport description. If you notice, I had only entered the webinar October 29 as a description, but what we're doing is we're concatenating additional information to the description, such as the change request number. So if you see here in the background, change request number from ServiceNow ends in 405, and what we're doing is we're adding that to the front of the description. So every transport in the system will have some change request number attached to it. As you can see in the example below here, every change request that is assigned to me, it's assigned to a change request as well. So if I need any details about what needs to be developed, configured, I can reference this change request to get more details. At the same time, if somebody's looking at the system and wondering why specific transports exist, maybe some objects are being shared, we can immediately see the change request here. We can see the owner, so we can contact the developers or configurators to figure out the scenarios. But this is very good from an end-to-end and traceability matrix perspective. It's very useful. So now that we have made a change, we have a change in development system. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to release the task. I'm not going to make any changes in Capture because it's going to prolong our demo and today's demo what we want to cover. But if you have any questions, any details around this process, we can set up a dedicated session and go through all the details in much more depth that are needed. But for today's demo, we're just going to release an empty transport because the idea is that we're going to demonstrate movement and management of transports from one system to another. Not so much concerned about the content of the transport, even though that's relevant because from a features perspective, some of the things that we do with our transports, obviously the content matters. But in this case, we're just showing how we can move that package or the transport from one system to another. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, you notice that we don't see any transport of copies button, but when I select the button now, because the task is released and the status has been updated in ServiceNow, now we see a button where it gives us the opportunity to create and import a transport of copies. A transport of copies essentially is just it's a snapshot of the original transport that is sent to QA for essentially as a snapshot so we can perform testing, like unit testing in QA before we release the transport. If you're not familiar, by the time we go to production using TOCs, we are going to end up with fewer transports to production for every iteration of testing that we do because we have an open transport. But what we should expect to see once I refresh the buffer is we'll see an entry here. And let me refresh the backend while I describe this piece. But what we'll see here is that we have now a ServiceNow change that has a new entry within the transport tab, which is 1540. This is a TOC number, and then we can see that it's TOC from the original transport, and which will match our STMS or TMS buffer. So we see here TOC 1540. We see the TOC has been imported, client 550 to 60. So we perform our testing in client 60, and if testing is concluded and it's positive, then we will be able to release our transport. And these are the conditions that we had mentioned. So for example, the create and import TOC button did not display until the transport or the task is released. So essentially the developer or configurator has to be done with their work. They close out their work by releasing the task. We can then create an imported TOC to send a snapshot to QA. And then once we send a snapshot to QA, because we have one TOC imported into QA successfully, now we see the button release transport. So we can either fail our test, go into development, create additional tasks, and capture additional configuration, or we can release a transport because we know the content is correct, and we're going to initiate the release of the transport. As suspected in the backend system, we will see here a new entry once the system is done processing the transport. But what we should see is a new row with the actual release transport. This particular step is taken a couple of seconds to execute, and there's a good reason for that, and I'll describe that shortly. But what we have done is we have imported we have released the ABAP transport from development, and essentially what we end up here is we end up in the process where we have two transports that are ready to be imported into QA. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to select the cloud-based change first, and we can initiate the import of that particular change to our QA environment. And then similarly, so we're just waiting for a couple of seconds. I'll describe shortly what's going on in the background, because there are several activities that are going on. And then I'm going to go ahead and select the ABAP transport, and I'm going to import the ABAP transport to the QA system. So similar to TMS, we have the opportunity to select the options that we get during TMS import. We can leave them blank, or we can select one of these options. And of course, this entire pop-up screen is optional if we choose to display it or not. But I'm not going to select any options. And in addition to that, if we had selected any of the opportunity or the checkbox for pre-import and post-import manual steps, if those were checked, then this is where we would have seen the pop-up to indicate or to inform us that there are manual steps, and then we would have the opportunity to check the box to say, yes, these steps have been completed, and all of that will be recorded in the log. All right, so let's take a look and see what's going on with the change request up to this point. So if we look at these two changes, what we're going to see is first, let's look at the CTMS change or CPI or cloud-based change, and we can see that the status is succeeded. What we were able to do is import into the CPI QA instance. So this particular change was imported into the QA system. At the same time, we have the ABAP change that was imported into client 060, which is our QA system. So you can see now both changes are in QA. And then if we were to move the ticket, once we go forward to status implement, we will be able to import the changes into the production system. And as you can see here, because the change has gone into QA and because the status that we're in, we no longer see the import transport button because the changes are there and there's no particular actions to be executed. Similarly to the cloud-based change, we do not have the import transport button visible because the import has already completed. So in this case, what we're going to do is we have the change in status authorized. We're done with the ABAP and CTMS-based changes. The next thing that we're going to do is approve this change. In this case, provide the CAB approval. Again, digital signature, all intact. I'm going to approve it on Sarah's behalf. And in this case, the change is in status scheduled. If you recall, based on our mapping that we performed, in status scheduled, there are no activities, no buttons that are mapped, but only when we get to status implement, we'll be able to see the additional buttons. Obviously, the refresh button is present everywhere because at any point we want to be able to update the data if anything has changed in the backend by any chance. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to switch to status implement. And then in status implement, we are going to start seeing the buttons again for importing, in this case into production. And keep in mind that jumping from one status to another, I'm doing it pretty seamlessly here because this system is not customized a lot. But in your case, if you have certain customization when only specific roles can execute, specific users can execute these steps, obviously all of that will still remain intact. So in this case, once we reach the status implement, we will be able to execute an import of the change. So let's execute the import of the ABAP first. And then we'll take a look at the ticket. and see some of the details that I've been, some of the reasons why some of these steps take, a few seconds to execute. And this has to do with the shift left automation that Steve had mentioned earlier. But if we go to our production, to our ABAP system, what we'll notice is that from earlier import, we had the real transport was imported into client 060, which is our QA. Then the same transport became available into client 099, which is our production system. And then it was imported with return code 4 into the production system. If we come into the ticket, we will notice that the ABAP particular transport has been imported into client TRI 099, which is our production client, and then with the details as far as the timing and when it was imported. In terms of the CTMS-based change, I'm not going to import one because we don't have a production system up and running at all times. So therefore, I will not be able to execute the import into production, but similarly to the way we executed for the ABAP system, we would be able to move it to the production CPI instance. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is we didn't talk about, so what we showed today is really the happy path. We didn't talk about any of the features that we have, any guardrails and any protections that are built into the tools. But let's take a look at the notes section, which will kind of answer a bunch of other questions that we often come across. From an auditing perspective and controls perspective, you notice that specific users were able to execute certain things. The conditions have to be in the right place. Although I executed pretty much all the steps as a system administrator for the sake of speed, but essentially what you'll be able to see on the ticket here is that we have all the details related to this particular change request from its inception through the steps of populating the field, updating the status of the ticket, providing any of the pre-approvals that are required. They're all captured in the tool. Then we initiated the transport creation. The transport has been created. The refresh was initiated to get the updated details. You can see here the transport of copies was initiated. We initiated the additional SAP calls. So when the import, the create and import TOC was initiated, obviously we initiated the call. But during the process of creating the TOC and importing into QA, and any transport, and anytime we export or import a transport, we are executing certain checks in the system to make sure that we're not going to damage production or any other system in the landscape. So for example, we're going to execute things like cross-reference checks. So we're going to make sure that every transport that's going into production, for example, all the checks are being executed to make sure that we're not going to fail. So all the prerequisites are being checked. All the cross-system object locking, if we have an N+1 landscape, all the object versions, the sequencing, all of these are being kept. We have tools that keep track of it, and then when you try to import into production, you will get warnings and or errors to prevent us from executing something that we know is going to fail. So these are all the preemptive checks that we do for pretty much every action of where it includes release or import of transport. So for the transport of copies, we executed these steps. Then we refreshed it one time, and then especially once we determined that the test results were positive, we went ahead and we initiated the release of the transport. As mentioned, the checks are executed again, and then we executed those checks for the ABAP, and then we executed the import of the CTMS-based change. And then we got the results that the change has been imported. Similarly, for the ABAP system, we initiated the import of the ABAP change. And again, this could be a change on BW, let's say, on an S4 system, any other ABAP system. It could be, you could have changes for cloud, ABAP, S4, and BW at the same time. So we can handle multiple requests. So let's take a look here. In the process, we saw that this was import into QA. We got the CAB approvals, and then finally the import into production system. So from an auditing perspective, And from controls perspectives, we are leveraging the ServiceNow framework from a security perspective, from conditions, from the field. So essentially, we're leveraging as much of ServiceNow as possible from its technology and bringing it all in one place. And auditors love this, especially when they go through the notes, because now they have all the details about the transport description, transport numbers, POCs. If we had selected anything related to testing, they would all be captured in here to show that, where the test evidence is, who approved it, and essentially end-to-end process is documented here. And auditors really, really love this capability of having everything in one place. So once we're in implement, the next step would be to go into status review. And depending on the conditions, but in this case, we can go to status review. And in review, what's important is that if you have an N+1 landscape and you are interested in leveraging a retrofit or retrofitting changes into project landscapes, we do provide the retrofit capabilities as well. So you'll be able to retrofit each change into your N+1 landscape. And as we go through the process, essentially we perform an analysis of the retrofit, and then we notice that because the transport was empty, this particular transport cannot be retrofitted because there's no objects in it. Otherwise, we would have a category, if it was green, for example, we could select it and then import the transport into N+1. And then finally, close our request because all the steps have been completed all the way to production. And if you're familiar with the ServiceNow controls, it's a very robust tool to be able to pretty much check off all the boxes and make sure that everything is complete before the status. We can move from one status to another, and that will ensure that we have a very tight process with high guardrails. And essentially, we should never be in a bad situation, because if the tool and the workflow is built correctly, we shouldn't really have exceptional situations unless we have back-end system errors with the transports of the system itself. So this is what we planned on showing today. Sorry, I forgot to mention one last piece. In addition to that, we have different dashboards that are delivered, because as you can imagine now, you have your SAP, non-SAP changes all available in one system. But not only that, we have additional information about each change and the relationship of the transports. So now we can get details on a dashboard with specific transport details. We can see how many changes maybe are approved for going into production. If we have like weekly changes, and from here on out, we can jump into a specific tool and then execute mass activities. For example, like mass test import, we can do mass import into production. There's a lot of tools built, my capabilities built into the tool, but for today's session, we just wanted to touch base mainly on the cloud-based transports and how we can manage those in an environment. And with that said, I wanted to see if there are any questions for us today.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you so much. Excellent demonstration. It was really nice to be able to see one single change request where you have transports both for ABAP as well as your BTP related changes, and how you can manage all of that. So what are the steps to get this installed? That's the first question that we have in chat today.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yes, I failed to mention that. So yeah, deployment of this tool, it's pretty straightforward. So the tool has two sides, if you will. It's the front end, the ServiceNow plugin that has to be deployed, and then the back end system would be a transport to your ABAP system that brings in the extra capabilities. So essentially, as far as installation, it's just going to the ServiceNow app marketplace and locating and downloading. Obviously, it has to be purchased and approved first, but you download the plugin and deploy it, which is straightforward, and then importing a transport on the SAP side. That's as far as deploying the tool from a technical perspective. Then obviously we have to connect the tools together And I would say the longest pole in the tent would be really designing this, the workflow and determining where the buttons are going to fall, and then the networking side. So with a good planning, this should be a pretty easy and straightforward process in terms of deployment.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that sounds pretty straightforward. And we do have some best practices in terms of how to implement. We know every customer is a little bit different in the way that they do that. So I agree, that's where we spend most of the time in discussions with new customers. Okay, and then if somebody is using ServiceNow, let's say they run ServiceNow for regular change management, but then they want to use Azure DevOps or let's say Jira for their projects, how could that kind of work together?
Sure. Yeah, so if you have a different ALM tool for projects, for example, certainly we can manage the transports. Our tool works with Azure DevOps or Jira from a front-end perspective. And yeah, you can manage the transports, for example, project transports in Azure DevOps, but maintenance can be done or is done by a ServiceNow. Certainly, you can use both tools in parallel, where from one tool, you would create project changes. For example, from ServiceNow, you would create changes in an S4 system. And then once a change is moved to production, for example, you can retrofit that into N+1. And then there's different methods to cross-reference any of these tickets if needed. For example, to say that this change exists because of that project. For example, if there's any relationship, we'd be able to do it on the fields themselves. But certainly you can manage and use both tools in parallel, and they would feed into one another. One would retrofit into the other, and then a project would repack into the maintenance at the end of the cycle.
Perfect, understood. Thank you. And then today you were operating more on a kind of a single change request at a time. I assume that you have the ability to like import changes en masse as well. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, we touched base a little bit on that, but yeah, we have the capability of executing mass actions or actions in mass or in bulk, if you will. So for example, if we have changes that have been queued up and we go to CAB and we have 6 change requests that have been approved, totaling in 10 transports, we can import that as a batch. We can import them all together in one go, and then all the checks will still be respected. And so yes, the short answer is we would be able to process multiple changes at the same time, whether it's to analyze those changes or import them. Yes.
Okay, great. Donna, great demonstration. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you very much for all the questions and your attention.
Great. And thank you all for joining us today from wherever you are coming from. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Please do reach out to us if you have any questions. If you'd like a tailored demonstration, you can go to our website, which is CoreALM.com. You can click on the Talk to an Expert button in the top right corner of your screen and fill out the form. That'll come to us, and we would be happy to meet with you to answer any questions you have or to give you a tailored demonstration. Thanks for reaching the end, and we hope to see you on the next webinar. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, and bye-bye.